You rearranged the living room last spring, moved the sofa, shifted the chairs, stood back and waited to feel something. And it still looked wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not embarrassingly wrong, just wrong in that specific, quiet way that makes you wonder if you're the problem, if your eye is broken, if the house itself is somehow resistant to looking the way you want it to look. You've bought things, swapped things out, painted a wall, added a plant, removed the plant. And yet there is still this stubborn gap between the room you have and the room you can see clearly in your mind. Here is what I want you to understand before we go any further. Your eye is not broken. The room is not cursed. What's actually happening is that you've been trying to solve a design problem without knowing what the problem is. You've been working at the surface, the colors, the objects, the accessories, when the actual issue lives one layer deeper. It lives in the relationships between things. The relationship between your furniture and the walls, between your bed and the space surrounding it, between a zone and its boundaries. These are the decisions that determine whether a room feels resolved or merely assembled. And most people never learn them because no one teaches them. Not in school, not in the magazines, not even in most interior design content, which tends to celebrate the results without ever explaining the mechanics. This video is about the mechanics. I'm going to walk you through 4 specific structural principles that determine whether a room actually works. Not decorating tips, not color trends, not a mood board. The underlying logic of why certain rooms feel expensive, calm, and considered, and why others, despite enormous effort and genuine good taste, still fall flat. By the time we finish, you'll have what designers spend years developing, a way of reading a room. You'll be able to walk into any space, including your own, and understand immediately what it's doing right, what it's doing wrong, and exactly what needs to shift. Let's start with the thing that almost every person gets wrong in a living room. And I mean almost every person, regardless of budget or how carefully they've chosen their furniture. The rug is too small. I know you've heard this before, but I don't think you've heard it explained in a way that actually makes you feel the why. So let me try. When you choose a rug that's too small for your seating arrangement, one that sits politely in the center of the room, while the furniture hovers around it like guests at a party who don't quite know each other, what you're actually doing is fragmenting the space. You're creating several separate visual events where there should be one unified composition. The sofa is one thing. The chairs are another thing. The coffee table is a third thing. And the rug is this small island that none of them fully belong to. The eye has nowhere to land. It keeps moving, searching for a center of gravity that isn't there. And that restlessness is what you're reading as the room feeling off. Here's what's actually happening, physiologically. When we scan a space, our visual system is constantly looking for grouping cues. It wants to know which objects belong together, where one zone ends and another begins, what the organizing principle is. A properly scaled rug does exactly that. It draws a perimeter around the seating arrangement and tells the brain, this is a complete unit. Everything inside this boundary belongs together. And once the brain accepts that, it can relax. The room stops feeling like a problem to be solved and starts feeling like a place to be in. The rule you need is simple, and it applies whether your room is large or small, whether your rug is patterned or plain, whether your furniture is modern or antique. At minimum, the front legs of your sofa and chairs need to sit on the rug, not floating in front of it, on it. That physical connection between the furniture and the rug is what creates the visual connection. It's what makes them read as a group rather than a collection of individual pieces that happen to be arranged near each other. If you can get the back legs on as well, even better. The larger the rug, the more settled and generous the space will feel. But the absolute floor, the non-negotiable minimum, is the front legs. When people push back on this, it's usually because they think a larger rug will make a small room feel smaller. I understand the logic, but it's backwards. A rug that's too small actually makes a small room feel more cramped, because it subdivides the limited space into even smaller, disconnected fragments. A rug that's correctly scaled does the opposite. It unifies, and unification always reads as calm, and calm always reads as space. Now, if you've already fixed the rug and the room still isn't working, the second thing to look at is where your furniture is sitting relative to the walls. This one is counterintuitive, so stay with me. When most people furnish a room, especially a room they're not quite sure about, they do what feels safe. They push things back. The sofa goes against the wall. The chairs go against the wall. The credenza goes against the wall. The thinking is that this creates more open space in the center of the room. More floor visible. More breathing room. More sense of openness. What it actually creates is a waiting room. Think about it this way. When all the furniture presses against the perimeter, the center of the room becomes a void. It's not open space, it's unused space. And there's a difference. Open space feels intentional. It has a relationship to the furniture surrounding it. It exists in service of something. Unused space just feels like a mistake. Like the room hasn't been thought through. Like someone dropped the furniture in and left. More importantly, furniture arranged against walls stops relating to each other. And furniture that doesn't relate to each other cannot create a conversation zone, which is ultimately what a living room is for. Not for sitting alone in separate chairs staring at the same wall, but for facing each other, for proximity, for the kind of arrangement that makes people want to sit down and stay. When you float furniture, when you pull it inward, even just slightly, something clicks. The sofa and chairs begin to orient toward each other. The coffee table becomes the shared center, rather than an object marooned in the middle of the floor. The room develops a focal point that isn't the television, and that shift matters more than most people realize. A living room organized around a screen is fundamentally different from a living room organized around people. One is passive. The other is inhabited. You don't need to make dramatic changes to test this. Pull the sofa forward 6 inches. Float one chair instead of pressing it to the wall. Angle 2 pieces slightly toward each other, just enough to create the suggestion of inward orientation. Then sit down and see what you feel. What you'll likely feel is that the room suddenly seems easier to be in, more welcoming, more like a place that was designed rather than just furnished. The floor behind the sofa becomes an asset. It creates a subtle layering that gives the room depth without adding a single object. The one practical concern people raise is circulation. If you float the furniture, can people still move through the room comfortably? The answer is yes, because you're not moving furniture into the center of the room. You're moving it away from the edges. There's a difference between a wall and a pathway. Keeping 18 inches of clear passage behind or beside a sofa doesn't require it to be pressed against the wall. It just requires a little thought about how people actually move through the space. Now I want to move into the bedroom. Because the bedroom is where I see a particular kind of design error happening over and over, and it's an error that's especially frustrating because it's invisible until you know what to look for. Then you cannot stop seeing it. The wall behind the bed is doing nothing. In so many bedrooms, the headboard floats in front of a completely blank wall. Maybe there's a small piece of art above it, maybe nothing at all. And the result is that the bed, which should be the anchor of the entire room, the single most visually dominant piece of furniture you own, ends up feeling vaguely provisional. Like it was placed there because it had to go somewhere, not because this is exactly where it belongs. The reason this matters is rooted in how we perceive weight and structure. When an object as large as a bed is backed by a surface that offers no visual resistance, nothing to push back against, nothing to frame it, the bed appears to float. Not in a light, airy way, in an unmoored way. The eye reads it as unsupported, and that reading translates directly into the feeling of the room. Rooms with unmoored beds feel unresolved. They have no hierarchy. The eye doesn't know where to settle. A feature wall fixes this. And I want to be careful about that phrase, because feature wall has picked up a certain cultural baggage. It can sound like an invitation to do something loud and trendy. An accent wall painted in a saturated color, a floor-to-ceiling gallery of frames, a peel-and-stick geometric pattern. None of that is what I'm describing. What I mean by feature wall is simply a wall that participates, a wall that is not passive, a wall that adds depth, texture, or visual weight behind the most important piece of furniture in the room. It can be quiet. It can stay entirely within a neutral palette. Wood paneling, even applied panels, not structural, adds warmth and texture without introducing any color at all. Lime wash paint creates depth through variation and movement in a way that flat paint simply cannot. Wallpaper, used with restraint and care, can frame the bed so precisely that the room suddenly looks like it was designed by someone who knew what they were doing. Because it was, and now that someone is you. The principle is the same regardless of the material. The wall behind the bed needs to announce itself. Not shout, announce. It needs to say, this is where the room's center of gravity is. This is where the eye should rest. And when it does that successfully, the entire bedroom reorganizes itself around that point. The bedside tables feel more intentional. The lighting feels more considered. Even objects you placed months ago without much thought start to look like they were always part of a plan. Let me show you why wallpaper specifically deserves more consideration than it typically gets. There's a persistent fear around wallpaper, that it's a commitment, that it dates quickly, that it's difficult to remove, that choosing wrong means living with the wrong choice for years. These concerns are not unreasonable, but they often lead people to leave the most influential surface in their bedroom completely bare, which is its own kind of commitment. Commitment to a room that never quite gets there. The solution is not boldness for its own sake, it's specificity. A soft tonal wallpaper, something with a subtle pattern in a palette that already lives in your room, costs almost nothing visually. It asks for nothing in terms of courage, but it gives back enormous amounts in terms of depth and resolution. It makes the wall feel chosen, and a wall that feels chosen makes the bed feel placed, and a bed that feels placed makes the room feel finished. If you're willing to go slightly further, a wallpaper with gentle color, something that coordinates with your bedding and wood tones rather than contrasting against them, begins to give the room something you can't achieve any other way. Atmosphere. That particular quality in rooms that makes you feel, the moment you walk in, that this space belongs to a specific person. Not decorated, but inhabited. Not assembled, but lived. The rooms that genuinely move people, the ones people photograph and save and return to, almost always have that quality. And almost always, it traces back to a decision about a wall. Now, while we're in the bedroom, there is a second structural issue that appears just as frequently, and it's one that can undo all the good work of a feature wall if it's not addressed. The nightstands, or more precisely, the absence of nightstands. Or nightstands that are functionally present but visually absent. Too small, too low, too insubstantial to provide what the bed actually needs. Here is what nightstands are actually doing in a well-designed bedroom. They are not surfaces for your water glass and phone charger. They are the flanking elements that give the bed its lateral boundaries. They complete the bed as a visual unit. Without them, or with nightstands so petite they barely register, the bed sits alone. It dominates the room without being anchored within it. All the visual weight collapses inward, and the bed becomes this imposing, isolated object, which makes the room feel simultaneously overcrowded and unfinished. This is about proportion and presence. Your nightstand should sit at roughly the same height as your mattress top, or just slightly above it. Not dramatically lower, not dramatically higher. The eye wants the bedside surface and the sleeping surface to feel continuous, like they exist on the same horizontal plane. When a nightstand is significantly lower than the mattress, it reads as an afterthought. When it's significantly higher, it competes rather than supports. Width matters too. A nightstand that's too narrow relative to the bed feels like a bookmark rather than a structure. You want enough surface area that it reads as a genuine architectural element, not an accessory. This doesn't mean enormous nightstands. It means nightstands with enough presence to hold their own next to a large piece of furniture. Now here's where it gets interesting. The nightstand doesn't have to match the bed. The design world spent decades insisting on matching bedroom furniture sets, and what this produced was millions of bedrooms that looked like a showroom floor. Technically complete, entirely soulless. The most sophisticated bedrooms almost always mix their materials. The bed in one material, the nightstands in another. The key is not matching, but coordinating, sharing a tonal register, a weight, a quality of material that makes them feel like they belong to the same world, even if they weren't purchased together. What you're after in a nightstand is what I'd call quiet substance, something that sits beside the bed with enough mass to be felt. A lamp adds vertical contrast and is non-negotiable. A nightstand without a lamp is a shelf, not a bedside table. The objects on the surface should feel deliberate. A book, a small object with meaning, perhaps a plant. Not a collection of everything you've put down in the past year and never relocated. The restraint of the surface matters as much as the choice of the nightstand itself. When you get the nightstands right, the right height, the right width, the right mass, something surprising happens to the whole bedroom. The bed settles. That's the only word for it. It stops feeling like an object dropped into the room and starts feeling like furniture that was considered, placed, and framed. And once the bed settles, the room can settle. The feature wall behind it, the ceiling height above it, the flooring below it. All of it begins to cohere in a way that, I promise you, no amount of new bedding will achieve on its own. I want to take a step back now and talk about something that underlies all four of these principles, because there is a connective thread between them that, once you see it, changes how you approach every room in your home. Every one of these principles is about relationships, not objects. The rug is not interesting in itself. What makes it powerful is the relationship it creates between the furniture and the floor, between the seating area and the surrounding space. Floating furniture is not a style. It's a decision about the relationship between pieces of furniture and the relationship between furniture and the negative space that surrounds it. The feature wall is not decoration. It's about the relationship between the bed and the surface behind it, between the most important element in the room and the architecture that holds it. The nightstands are not accessories. They define the relationship between the bed and its boundaries, between the horizontal plane of the mattress and the vertical plane of the room. This is why surface-level decorating so often fails to produce the result people are hoping for. When you buy a new throw pillow, you're adding an object. When you paint a wall a different color, you're changing an attribute. But if the underlying relationships are broken, if the furniture is floating against the walls without purpose, if the bed is unanchored, if the rug is too small to unify what it's meant to unify, no amount of objects or attributes will fix it. You'll keep spending money and swapping things out, and the room will keep not quite working. And you'll keep wondering what you're missing. What you're missing is the structure. And I don't mean structure in the architectural sense, not columns and load-bearing walls. I mean the invisible scaffolding that a well-designed room operates within. The hierarchy that tells the eye where to go first and where to rest. The boundaries that tell the brain where one zone ends and another begins. The relationships that make a collection of furniture feel like a composed, intentional space, rather than a series of individual purchasing decisions arranged in proximity. Once you have that structure in place, decoration actually starts to work. The throw pillow reads differently because the sofa it's sitting on is now properly anchored and related to the other furniture in the room. The art on the wall reads differently because the wall itself is now doing something, contributing to the composition. The objects on the nightstand read differently because the nightstand has the mass and proportion to support them. Everything scales up when the foundation is right. Everything stays flat when it isn't. I can't move on without saying this because it's the part that I think is most useful and most rarely said. The rooms that people aspire to, the ones in the magazines, on the television programs, in the accounts they follow obsessively, those rooms don't feel the way they feel because of the specific objects in them. They feel that way because every object is participating in a composition that is structurally sound. The expensive sofa in a room with the wrong rug still looks wrong. The beautiful wallpaper on a wall that doesn't need it still looks wrong. The carefully chosen nightstand in a bedroom where the bed is floating still looks wrong. The principles come first. The objects serve the principles, never the other way around. This is actually liberating information, even if it doesn't immediately feel like it. Because it means that the rooms you want to live in are not out of reach due to budget. They are not out of reach due to access to a designer. They are out of reach only until you understand the principles, and the principles are learnable. They are not talent. They are not instinct, though instinct trained on these principles eventually becomes something that feels like talent. They are a set of structural decisions that can be made deliberately, with intention, once you know what you're looking for. The journey, and I mean this in the most practical, non-motivational sense, from a room that doesn't work to a room that does, almost always involves fixing the same small number of things. Anchoring the seating area with a correctly scaled rug. Pulling the furniture inward so it relates to itself rather than to the walls. Giving the bed a wall that participates behind it. Flanking the bed with nightstands that have enough presence to earn their position. 4 things, 4 relationships, 4 structural decisions that cost, in many cases, very little or nothing at all. Sometimes it's moving furniture you already own. Sometimes it's finding a rug in a larger size that isn't dramatically more expensive. Sometimes it's as simple as changing where the front legs are sitting. The final thing I want to leave you with is a reframe that I believe is worth sitting with. Most people approach their homes as a collection of objects. They think in terms of what to get, what to replace, what to add. The design content they consume reinforces this. It's almost always organized around things. This sofa, this rug, this lighting fixture, this color. The implicit promise is that if you get the right things, the room will be right. And so people keep getting things, and the room keeps not being right, and the cycle continues. What I'm asking you to do is think about your home differently. Not as a collection of objects, but as a set of relationships that you are responsible for managing. You are not a consumer trying to assemble the right pieces. You are a person making decisions about how things relate to each other, how spaces are defined, how weight is distributed, how the eye moves through a room, and where it settles. Those decisions are yours. They don't require a designer. They don't require a renovation. They don't require more money. They require a different way of seeing. And once you have that way of seeing, something shifts permanently. You walk into a room, yours, someone else's, a hotel lobby, a restaurant, and you read it. You understand immediately what it's doing and what it's not doing. You see the rug that's too small and know exactly why the room feels unsettled. You see the bed floating against a blank wall and understand why the space feels incomplete. You see the furniture pressed against the perimeter and feel the waiting room energy it creates. And in your own home, you know what to do about it. That is the real transformation here. Not a better-looking room, though that will come. The real transformation is a better informed eye. One that doesn't guess and hope anymore. One that sees clearly, diagnoses accurately, and acts with confidence. Your home has always been responding to decisions. The only thing that changes now is that you're the one making them.